We had a 1v1 set up between Rob and Fnatic, but he's MIA. It's systemic racism. Would you like to take his? You know what? Sure. Why not? Oh, here we go. We get to debate Rob on systemic racism. Isn't that fun? Wait, right? Oh, we're doing this right now? This is very last minute Aftershock.
We found a replacement. We'll roll on with the replacement. Shark Zero.
That's so weird too, because I messaged him like not too long ago, like a couple hours ago. I was like, hey, just a reminder, 10 p.m. But yeah, that something probably came up.
It's all right.
All right, Shark, I sent you the whereby.
He said he
in
had
my
to arrest him.
DMs.
Yes.
Okay, let me join that.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and start this really quickly. Got this right here. All right, so first, I want to thank everyone for being here on the Wednesday night's normal debates. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it for taking the time out of your days to be here. Shark, thank you for coming in clutch. I appreciate you, man. You're the champ. Sorry, I'm a little messed up here. Okay. Okay, so the way this will work, one topic. Usually it's two topics, but we're only doing one topic. It's going to range for about 2 to 2.5 hours, about maybe a little bit less. It never really goes that long, but we'll be able to dive deep in the topic pretty well, which is really nice. At first, I will let each panelist introduce themselves, but we've already done that. But we will do our political lenience, all that good stuff. After which I'll present the topic. Then each panelist gets to give their thoughts on said topic in a short 2-minute intro. Now, just a quick little comment on the intros. Only give us your thoughts on the topic. Don't counter anyone else's intros. Just your plain thoughts on it. We'll get into arguing, each other's positions afterward. Then we'll open it up to a back and forth debate. And after the time for the topic has ended, I will then ask each panelist to give their closing thoughts. 2 minutes for outros as well. I'll be moderating and I'll be interjecting when there's either a miscommunication or maybe I can help with that, or the discussion is just getting, messy and, we need to get things back in order. If you have any links, any pictures, any videos, etc., provide them in the whereby chat and I will screen share with the panel. Once you start talking about the source, once you mention the source, and this source 10% of whatever, then I'll bring it up. Now, this is for the audience of each panelist. Once the topic has come to a close, we will take a couple of questions from the audience. I will be in the chats of everyone's, letting the chat know when to post the questions. When I do, make sure to tag me in the question and state who the question is for, if it's for anyone in particular or just for anybody. As far as language goes, you guys can do you, but obviously when I talk, no one else talks. Period. I will mute. It doesn't matter if you want to rebut anybody or finish what you're saying. Everyone stops. So that's about it. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm good.
Questions. All right, cool. So and Cut Sleeves will join. He said that he's
I'm sorry. I got one question.
Yeah.
So I get that at certain parts we're just going to be open discussion. But there can be times where I guess interruptions and things can become problematic. Can we try to keep this as civil as possible? Because I will refrain from. I might interject every now and then, maybe a word or two, but I will not interrupt. Can we try to keep it civil in that way? Do you think that might be beneficial?
Sure. Definitely. I'll make sure we're on point on that too. I suspected that this can get very very loud really quickly. So let's try to watch out with that. I'll keep an eye out too. I will mute. Don't think I won't. So no questions after that, right? All right. Since we're waiting on Cut Sleeves, he'll probably have his intro when he comes in. So let's just introduce each other and our political lenience, since we already plugged, where to find everybody. So, Fnatic, tell us a little bit about yourself, your political lenience and everything.
I don't even know where I stand politically. I guess I maybe started out as a conservative. I guess I was raised pretty conservative. I think I got older. I became a little bit more liberal. I guess I would have considered myself a conservative for quite a while, for the vast majority of my life. I feel like just recently the Republican Party has become so ridiculous that it's almost impossible to support them. So at this point now, I think I consider myself to be somewhat in the middle. I think I lean pretty conservative on certain social issues, but I think there's plenty of issues where I lean to the left as well. So I consider myself to be in the middle.
Okay, cool. Shark, go ahead and give us your info. By the way, we can't see you on Whereby anymore. I don't know if that's just me.
My camera started messing up. I tried to I tried to fix it in the back end, but every time I get out of the properties of my my Streamlab, the camera just died.
It's all right.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Yeah. So give us some info about yourself.
So I consider myself a leftist socialist, progressive, SJW. All right. Women are okay, I guess. In some portions of my, you know, they're all right. I always grew up in a left-leaning household. So I didn't have to fight too hard from the conservative grasp over my mind and soul. But we're just kind of like vibing here, and it's we're doing great things, and I'm happy to be here. Black people exist. Black people are real.
All right. And Rob, you didn't get to give your plug too, so go ahead and just give us all that stuff.
Sure. My name's Rob Noor. I consider myself a conservative populist. I think the biggest issue we face is corruption. The government doesn't really care about white people, black people, men, women, anyone that's average. They only care about consolidating power for the people already at the top positions of power. And on this topic specifically, I say this in every opening, but it really affects this topic specifically, that they are intentionally causing division based on things like race to kind of cover up for the fact that it's more class-based and it's more based on this power projection. I was raised in a family that didn't really care about politics, and I'm kind of my own person. So,
Where can we find you?
Rob Noor, all lowercase, ROBNOERR, as you see it spelled there. One word, all lowercase, at Twitch TV.
All
is
right,
my mic
cool.
too low? Is that no? My mic's
I hear you fine.
okay. Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's get into the topic. Let's see right here. All right, first topic, systemic racism. So with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Breonna Taylor, all that stuff that's been in the news recently, the topic of race and the impact it has on people's judgment on one another has probably been the sole focus in today's politics. But how much of this notion has merit, if any at all? Panelists, what do you think? We'll go ahead and start with Mr. Fanatic. Go ahead and give us your thoughts. 2 minutes.
I think I don't know. When you want to look at individual cases, I guess it can be a little bit more nebulous trying to determine like the impact of race on those specific cases. When I tend to talk about systemic racism or systemic oppression of any kind, I think the biggest portion of my focus tends to be more on looking at systems, and systems are going to require to look at data. It's really hard to determine the efficacy or the effect of a system when trying to look at an individual or an individual case. So for me, I think systemic oppression is very, very evident. We see it, and it affects our actual daily lives on a regular basis for some of us, right? When it comes to my mother applying for a loan, when I have certain siblings or certain family members who might be doing prison time right now that are doing longer sentences than would their white counterparts do. I think looking at like trying to determine like outcomes and see what are the cause of those outcomes, a lot of times you can trace or race and see how race plays a very important factor in causal relationship for an outcome, not just looking at the outcome and controlling for race, but you can see how race caused it. I think we have an obvious history of systemic oppression. I guess the question becomes whether or not that systemic oppression disappeared in the last amount of years, I guess. And I don't think that there's plenty of studies that show that systemic oppression is still here. It still existed. Redlining hasn't been completely, like there's been no serious attenuants. So I think looking at systemic oppression through data, I think it's almost undeniable.
All right, nice. Mr. Rob Noor, 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so the problem is going to be first, just to get some things out of the clear. Like, yes, systemic racism obviously existed in the past. It could potentially exist today. The problem is that it's blown out of proportion. It's also the fact that people will say to look at data, but oftentimes there's no causal proof in the data. It just shows discrepancies in outcomes, and people say, then the justification might be racism. Also, there's no problem that you can't link to systemic racism. Literally everything that we say in most of these debates, it doesn't matter what you get. They'll just say, well, the reason it's because of that is is because of systemic racism. For example, oftentimes what's cited is discrepancy in law enforcement numbers to prove that there's systemic racism against black people. But then when you start to get into it and you say maybe the reason that police have violent altercations almost 2.5 times more with black Americans than white Americans is because black Americans tend to commit violent crime 2.5 times more the rate. And that would explain, if there's more violence, why police would also have about that exact proportion of more violence involved in that community. They'll just say, but the reason for that is systemic racism. And it doesn't matter how far we go down that rabbit hole. Yes, racism existed in the past, and I'm willing to hear how it possibly exists today. But when you say everything is a result of racism, it just becomes nonsensical. And it also leads to misidentifying the solution, which leads to solutions from people, many that talk about systemic racism all the time, that actually makes lives worse for the very people that they talk about. For example, the defund the police movements leading to increased homicides in the areas that we need the police most, particularly inner city neighborhoods. So also we'll point out other discrepancies in other data that show that there's more discrepancies in other groups than from blacks to whites. Yeah, it's very strange, despite those discrepancies being larger, that we don't see the big movement saying, my God, this person was incarcerated because of this other category. And so I think you find that very dubious and strange, but I'm interested to go through the data as we've done so many times and see if we can find for the first time, as far as I know, that all of this is causally from systemic racism when we're discussing the problems that occur in these communities.
Nice. All right, Mr. Shark, go ahead. 2 minutes, sir.
All right. Well, I mean, our country has been racist for a pretty long time, since some of the first black people got here as literal property. Listen, none of these problems have been truly addressed at all. Redlining only started to really fade in the 90s. To imagine that this doesn't have any like real world effects today is honestly laughable. The idea that we could like tie systemic racism back to like everything. Well, I mean, if you want to know why one group is has different outcomes and do certain actions than another group, I mean, you could just look back at what's been going on. It's not like there's some it's not like black people have the bump they low rider really loud and be mean to cops gene. There's probably something back in the history of these people generationally that carries on today, and something that happens today that makes outcomes different. This is probably just true. Lots of people try and say that that it's people that are racist and not systems. I'd like to ask you, what makes up systems? We did not find the judicial system. We did not find the police system. We did not find the banking system that we have today out in the wild. Just we kicked over a rock in the Amazonian rainforest, and all of a sudden we found these systems. They're made up of people who have biases, and their biases can easily work their way into a system and make that system racist and have racist outcomes, and there'd be racist reasons for the reason why we see discrepancies. This has been borne out in a fair amount of data, and I don't really think there's too much even to really argue about.
All right, so we will enter into the open discussion. Keep in mind as well that we're still waiting on cut sleeves. So let's try to keep it like a little bit balanced. When it comes to like going back and forth and stuff. Just to keep that in mind. But other than that, go ahead, guys.
Yeah, so, I mean, the problem is going to be, as these debates often come down to, like, we could already see the groundwork coming from it. So redlining exists. And so when we talk, remember the initial claim that was kind of being made, not by either of you two, but that was the big national claim, was that the police are racist, that they're systemically hunting and killing unarmed black men because they're racist. And as that sort of fell through, it becomes, well, the reason that there's more violent police interactions is because of racism. And we'll always be able to draw, just because there was racism in the past doesn't mean that causally that's the reason for discrepancies that we see right now. And I'd be interested, you say that there's not even much of a discussion to be had. I'd be interested to see the proof that you have that you think that you're able to make that claim.
Actually, real quick. Sure. Yeah, so cut sleeves, you there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Systemic racism. 2 minutes for an intro. Can you do that for us?
Yes, sir.
All right, 14 minutes. Go ahead. Well, it's at 14.
Okay. 2 minutes for me. You're right. Okay. So, beginning, we have two issues. One, the problem, and second, the solution. Firstly, I assume that Democrats, mostly leftists, are overblowing the problem. We can acknowledge that systemic racism exists, but not to a degree where it's this very big monster that prevents individuality. Systematic racism exists as a structure to prevent some of the access that you've given, the doors that can be opened from when you're born. Systematic racism is a way that generational wealth happens. But that does not prevent you or does not excuse you from the bad decisions that you do. Second part is the solution. The solution, the left-leaning solution, is to have big, broad change. On the individual level, it's excuse this guy, excuse this, excuse that. It was systemic racism that made him do this. It was systemic racism that made him do that. We need to defund the police for these individuals that are doing bad things. We need to abolish the police for these individuals that are doing bad things. We have to increase the welfare for these individuals that are doing bad things. Their solution is the government. Their solution is state control for the individual. The righty solution, individual control for the individual. Of course, you've heard the old saying, pull yourself up by your bootstrap. This is right. Even though impossible, it is right. People can pull themselves up by their situation. And even if other environmental factors have control, it's ultimately your say, and it's ultimately your decision for what you can choose. Now, in this quote off with this, you cannot choose how you were born. The only thing you can choose in your life is how you react to situations. You.
All right. Open discussion. Go ahead, guys.
So really quickly before we continue, can we define systemic racism? I just want to get Rob. Can you tell me what your definition of systemic racism is?
Yeah, systemic racism would be when institutions in power in this country enact in a way, whether consciously or unconsciously, to negatively affect people based on their race. Do you think how would you define it?
Okay, so let me make sure. You said it's when institutions in power act consciously or unconsciously to negatively affect people based on their race. That's
correct.
That's good. Okay. I think I'm perfectly fine with that definition. So when we look at, like, for example, the North Carolina voting laws, right? Those things, would you call that systemic racism?
No.
So the way that the Supreme Court struck this down is they said that there was something that they literally targeted specifically. They asked for voting data by race, and then after they got the voting data by race, they went and restricted specific things, specifically targeting African American voters. Found the areas where African American voters were more likely to how they voted specifically, and then targeted specifically those things. According to the Supreme Court justice that struck that thing down, he said they did so with surgical precision. So if they literally ask for the data and then directly target the specific African American vote, you don't feel like that would be systemic racism?
Well, so I thought. I will admit, I thought you meant the Georgia voting law that we were just talking about.
No,
With the
North Carolina.
Okay, the North Carolina situation, I will admit to having a limited knowledge of what happened. Just because the Supreme Court said something doesn't necessarily mean it's gospel. However,
I agree.
let me say this, right? If government intentionally targeted a group of people based on their race and then intentionally said our intent is to pass a law to purposely try to get less of those people to vote, then yes, that would be an institution of race. That would be an institution using racism. That sort of stuff, I don't know if it was just interpreted that way or if that's what actually happened. Regardless, no one's going to claim that nothing racist has ever happened. The point is, are the massive problems that we see today are because there's such a massive problem with this systemic racism. You could give that example. Okay, but I could get
the conversation is not about whether or not.
Fair enough.
And also, Rob, you agreed that whether it was implicit or explicit, that would still be systemic racism. It doesn't matter what their intent is.
It matters if the intent is to disenfranchise someone based on race, consciously or unconsciously. Right?
Okay, hold on.
So that's
real
quick, and then I'll leave you respond. If that's the case, will you admit there's systemic racism against white people, against Asians, against men, against straight people?
Okay, wait, hold on. Wait, the goalpost has moved dramatically. We got to make sure that we keep this really centered. The conversation about whether or not systemic oppression and systemic racism exists today, moving the conversation to talk about how widespread the effect is, moving the conversation to whether or not it's the leading cause of the problems today. That's not the conversation. The conversation is specifically, does systemic racism exist today? So that's
because here's what happened. here's what'll happen. This is what'll happen. Someone will say, yes, there is a system, and that system has used racism in small ways that we could see. Therefore, that proves our point. But it doesn't prove the point of the growth.
No.
And let me tell you why. Why do you need to deflect? Just is there systemic racism against white people today?
Hey, wait, hold on. I just need to make sure that we're not acknowledging before we go there that the conversation is just, if we need to write it down so that we can make sure it's like the headline so we're clear here. The conversation is, does systemic racism exist today? Right?
Correct.
That's the
Is there
conversation?
systemic,
Okay.
right? But you asked specifically about black people. I'm asking specifically about white people. Is that not part of the conversation?
I asked for a specific instance to see if you would call that specific instance systemic racism.
And I'm just asking in general. You seem to have articulated what you think is an instance of systemic racism that targets black people.
And we haven't really
And
fully
I'm
fleshed that
asking,
out, and you're already moving the
no,
goalposts. You're doing a what
I'm
about
not moving the
right now.
goalpost. So it's not whataboutism. Do you think systemic racism exists against
I
white
think you
people
missed
today?
it.
You
Wait,
did literally say,
Fanatic,
what about
you
white
only
people?
answered the question.
You literally
Wait,
I
no.
literally said what about
You
white
guys-
people. I didn't say that.
You guys missed the answer. Wait, you guys missed the. He did answer a question, and I'm going to question you.
Okay,
You
I'm
missed
sorry.
the answer.
Can you repeat it?
Yes, I said if they specifically targeted people. Right? You didn't hear this? I didn't think let me repeat. If they specifically targeted people for their race, for a law to intentionally cause those people to vote less, yes, that would be racism. The point is that this is constantly how these debates go. People will say, I found one instance that I could think of racism, therefore it proves the broader question. So I'm just trying to ask, if that's how we're going to do, if that's what we're going to do, pick out one incident and say this proves the conversation that systemic racism is true. So now I'm asking you a question. Does systemic racism in our system right now exist against white people?
Oh, you're muted.
I'm not positive that there's systemic racism against white people. If you can show me systemic racism against white people, I'd be willing to accept it. It's possible.
Real quick. So the instance that you gave was kind of, we had to go through a bunch of steps. They targeted this, and this. How about this? Oakland, California decided to give people that made less than $25,000 a year checks for $1,000 a month, but only if they're black. Is that systemic racism?
Yeah, that would be systemic racism.
Okay, that exists. How about affirmative action laws that say SAT scores for whites and Asians have to be higher than blacks in order to get into schools? Is that systemic racism?
I would not say affirmative action laws are systemic racism.
Well, it is. How about?
It's not. So wait, hold on. Wait. Let's not do a Gish Gallop thing, right? So I'm going to address this one. Okay. I don't know the law. I don't know the other law that you were specifically talking about. But it sounds like if a law is specifically saying that it will only give some sort of money specifically to African Americans, then it sounds like that could be racist, unless it depends on what their intention is. If the intention of that law is specifically something like reparations or something to offset a systemic injustice that had been done to other people, then no, it would not be racist. I'm not particularly familiar with that specific law, so I probably shouldn't have granted that so readily because
red flag. You agree with Rob Noor's definition when he said it could be unconscious or conscious. So why does the interpretation or the motivation of that event matter if it could be unconscious or unconscious? It sounds like to me when he defined it, it was only like impact driven, right?
No, so the reason why intent matters in this specific thing, right, is because so when you're talking about the intent of the law, when you're specifically referring to reparations, while reparations will have a beneficial effect to offset previous systemic oppression and systemic racism in that case, right? The intent is not racist. The intent is not because we believe that race is going to be creating these whatever, and we want to harm or disproportionately a specific group or whatever. It's to offset previous thing. That difference in intent creates an entirely different emotion. It creates an entirely different feeling, and that's an entirely different driver. So that belief system wouldn't be racist. That belief system would be fixing the racism.
Also, this has been taken to the Supreme Court a couple of times, especially those affirmative action policies when it pertains to like Asian students and white students as well, and they lost every time because there's no calculable, measurable harm on a systemic level for those groups of people.
Not to mention that the largest benefit. One thing is just to put on there as well. The largest benefit of affirmative action is actually Caucasian women. The largest beneficiary of affirmative action in this country, in the United States, is white women. So at this point,
what does that have anything to do with anything?
So then
if there are laws that are bigoted that designed to benefit people based on immutable characteristics, that still makes them bigoted, whether it be sexist or racist. Okay.
No, in order for it to be bigoted,
Okay, no,
go
so
ahead, you can
this is,
finish
and
your
this is what you see. So for the audience, this is what you often see. You see there's convoluted, well, marijuana laws are anti-black because we think that they were intended to purposely incarcerate black people, and therefore if there's a discrepancy in whites and blacks that are incarcerated under marijuana, that proves systemic racism. But when you have an actual policy that's literally blatant, like we will give black people money but not white people, they're like, well, if the intent was to do good things, this is absurd. It is absolutely absurd. It's making excuses for blatant racism. We can see that systemic racism does exist, and I never said that it didn't. I said that it's massively blown out of proportion. So what we'll see, one is when it's said to be systemic racism against the groups that people on the left want to consider oppressed, they'll say, "Oh my God, it's the result of it's the reason for all of these ills." Then when we see blatant racism on the right, they say that's okay. That racism is okay when it's directed on people that we consider oppressors because it's just racism making up for past racism. This is nonsense. Racism is racism regardless of what, oh, my intent was to be a good racist. It's still racist. It is literally the definition of systemic racism. It's blatant. We don't have to go through a bunch of convoluted things. I could give example after example that we've just seen during the Biden administration. For example, the CDC coming out and saying they recommended who. All right, I won't get into the examples. That's fine. Instead, we'll just talk about the one example of of voting.
No. So here's what we need to do. We need you to stop doing that already. Okay? We're having a conversation between the two of us. You started off with your opening line with all sorts of straw mans and all sorts of arguments that none of us have made whatsoever. I felt like we were going into a conversation to have a specific conversation on a specific talk. You're talking to me right now. It's incredibly rude of you to do these excerpts right now where you're addressing your audience, where I just got to sit here and twiddle my thumbs, where you're talking all sorts of nonsense that have nothing to do with the conversation at hand. I'm giving you my time right now to have a conversation with you. Have the conversation with me. You can address your audience, take down notes, do whatever you need to do to express to talk to your stream when this is over, or you can mute while I'm talking and talk to your stream when this is over. But it's entirely a waste of our time. We do have a limited amount of time to have conversations in which you're trying to address your audience and give your excerpts about what's happening here. Allow them to make their own determination. Allow them to make their own determinations about the conversation when as they see fit, and you can address them and give all of that. You can do another stream where you're addressing it, but don't waste my time with that. That's not conducive of an actual conversation.
Sure.
Allow me to retort. Allow me to retort. Allow me to please cut sleep. Allow me to retort. Cut sleep. Allow me to retort. Cut sleep. One, it's my show. I'll talk in the way that I see fit. You want to make excuses for blatant racism? You shouldn't be surprised when people tell others, look at how this is making excuses for blatant racism. Second, into the event that maybe I wasted some of your time, that could be true. You could think that comment wasn't worth your time.
Okay.
For about 30.
Stop. Everybody stop. No, Rob. No, I'm gonna mute you, Rob. I understand what both of you guys are saying, but we're literally not talking about the discussion anymore. We're just going back and forth.
I'm not going to.
Okay, Rob. But I do because I have to moderate the
debate.
debate.
You can just mute me for the rest until you let me finish my point. I'm not going to continue with the rest of the debate.
Rob, no.
Rob, what
I'll just mute. Let's go ahead. I'll listen. No. You guys go ahead.
You can't hold the conversation hostage. This is not a real conversation. Like, this is actually absurd. Like, hold on.
No, hold on. Stop. Everybody, I want to literally just get back into the argument. I understand.
Right.
I get both sides here. I understand the frustrations. Cut sleeves. Go ahead.
I will not get back into the argument until I'm allowed to finish my point. So,
Rob,
I'll just sit here silently for 2 hours. That's fine.
Rob, what was your
point?
I'm
going to finish my point. My point is, if you're 40 minutes or if you're 30 minutes late, you don't get to talk about other people wasting your time.
Thank you, Rob.
For sure. Listen, and 100%, like 100%, I take total responsibility for wasting your time in that way. It was not intentional. I genuinely did think that the thing was supposed to start at 7:30. That's my fault. 100%. I 100% own that. I apologize. I think there's a very big difference between someone making an accidental mistake and then someone literally being as rude as possible by literally talking past.
Okay. Stop, guys. Yeah, stop there. No more. Literally no more. This is literally not productive. Just stop. Everybody's no, I don't want to hear anything about anything anymore. Just back on topic. Cut sleeves. You'll take this because I don't think you're going to. You just steal the conversation. Go ahead.
Now let's talk about time again. Okay, no, back to the central point. If I don't think we're okay. So is the premise here that if we can find one instance of systematic racism in a state, that means like broadly white people or broadly black people is impacted by systemic racism? Is that like the goal we're setting here?
No, that wasn't that wasn't my goal here. I thought the goal here was to prove that systemic racism still exists today within the United States of America. And I feel like we can get into more specifics. Once we get past the very beginning thing, then the conversation can morph, and that's where I think decent conversations go. So I
Well,
started out the conversation. I thought it started the conversation under the premise that Rob didn't believe systemic racism existed, and I wanted to address that. But if he does believe that systemic racism exists, then we can start getting into more specific examples of that, and then see if there is systemic racism against white people. I don't believe there is
real
that
quick
much,
though,
but
Fanatic. Hold on, real quick though, Fanatic. The just to be clear, the topic wasn't that specific. It was just on systemic racism. So yeah, I just want to make it as fair as possible. That's a fair question to ask, and I do think that should be asked. But it wasn't on whether it exists or not. It's just on it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
okay.
yeah.
So it's hard to talk about systemic racism like as a broader subject if we can't get past the preliminary conversation about whether or not it exists in the first place, right?
I mean,
Right. No. The premise. Okay, yeah. If I can, I kind of want to shift the premise a little bit. Not if systemic racism is existing, because me and Rob Noor also have said like, okay, systemic racism exists to a degree. I want to talk about more impacts. I feel like impacts and solutions. Like, how big is systemic racism, and what are the solutions to systemic racism? Is that a fair characterization, Rob?
It's not, and here's the problem with that. That conversation is actually a little bit ridiculous because it already presupposes that systemic racism exists. If you want to have a conversation about the impact of systemic racism, before we can even do that, we have to prove that it exists. And it's really ridiculous to start talking about solutions for something that someone doesn't even believe it exists. Because if I'm talking let me explain. Hold on. Let me explain. So, any solution that I give you, any solution that we talk about regarding systemic oppression is going to come at a cost. There's going to be a cost of implementation, the cost of planning, there's going to be significant cost, right? Taxes, all sorts of things. There's going to be cost associated with this thing. And anytime someone wants to spend resources and cost on a problem that doesn't exist, it's going to be looked at as absurd by the countering party. If you came to me and told me, I believe there are goats here and I think that we should spend 50 cents of your finances on ridding yourselves of these goats, I'd look at you like you're foolish, right? Because I don't believe it exists. So I wouldn't agree to give you 10 cents.
Okay, Fanatic. I understand. I understand what you mean. I understand what you mean. Yeah. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to take any sides. I just want us to get back on topic. Just get back on topic. Yes, but we're like right now we're. Yeah.
If I may, you're just arguing. You're speaking of ghosts. That's what you're arguing at. No one here said systemic racism. I give you various examples of how systemic racism does exist, particularly against whites, against Asians. I said in my opening speech, systemic racism certainly existed in the past. It probably exists to some small degree today. The problem is it's massively blown out of proportion, and people want to say systemic racism is responsible for all these ills, and it allows the people proposing solutions that actually make things worse. And I said what you'll see is, oftentimes what you'll see, and I say this all the time on my show, this is how this will go. Someone will say, oh, redlining. Yeah, yes, redlining existed. Here's an example of systemic racism, and I'll be like, yeah, that existed. Therefore that means I win my position. No, you don't win your position. There are privileges and detriments to all sorts of immutable characteristics that come from the system, come from these institutions, such as being white or being black or being straight or being gay or being a man or being woman or being Christian or being Muslim or being atheist. There are all sorts of ways that the system has privileges or incurs penalties on groups in specific ways for these things. The problem is that we end up doing things like justifying actual systemic racism, saying, I'm okay with, if the reason that Oakland's only giving money to poor black people instead of poor white people is because they think poor black people have been oppressed, I'm okay with that. No, that's still systemic racism. That's what it is. That's the definition. So as far as I'm concerned, like that is where the conversation is. You just being like, well, everyone's saying it doesn't exist. I didn't say that. Cut Sleeves didn't say that. So I don't know where this is coming from. We're saying that it's massively overblown. That's the problem. And we can see how it justifies actual systemic racism by the constant focus on it.
Rob, you said that there's systemic racism today, but it's not very big. In what way, correct, shape, or form, in what institution, and what effect does systemic racism have on people today, black people specifically?
I know that would be incumbent on the people that are talking about that to be able to prove. Right. So, for example, we talked about an instance that would be, if I accept what the Supreme Court said and what Fanatic said, I have no reason to think that he's being disingenuous here. That would be a specific incident where that specific law that was struck down would have had a direct effect on people in a systemic racist way. Right. The problem is and this is why I said this is where the real debate is, because you're going to say, the data shows that there's a discrepancy in the amount of people that are arrested whites and blacks. Therefore, that proves systemic racism. That does not prove systemic racism, right? That's the problem. So if you, what do you mean? Who said that? The point is, like
I
when you
didn't say
say,
that.
right, but he's saying, what effect does it have on the African American community? Okay,
Okay,
well,
but
tell me
address
what
we're
you're
talking
saying.
about. No one said those things
Oh,
yet. So like,
Okay,
that's a straw man.
okay, that's one thing. So tell me the examples of systemic racism that
No,
you
Rob,
think
I
that are
would like to
occurring
pick
today.
your brain. You told me
Sure.
systemic racism exists. How, in
Yes.
what capacity, and how does it hurt black people today?
Well, I gave the blatant ways that exist, the easy ways that we can see from white people, men, other groups like that. If there are law, I don't know the specific. Point to me the law that's systemically racist.
Rob, you told me, do you not agree that systemic racism exists?
Right,
Do you not
okay,
believe
okay.
it
Real quick,
exists?
let's go through what you just asked. You said systemic racism exists. I say yes, and I give a bunch of examples. You say, how does that affect black people? The examples I gave were systemic racism that we could blatantly see, and most of those blatant examples went against white people and other groups. Why do you want me then to prove your point? I gave a bunch of examples of systemic racism that went against groups I was talking about. Now you give me an example of systemic racism against black people, and then we could discuss if that's actual systemic racism and what the effect it has.
I just want to
community.
understand your point. Do you not believe that there is systemic racism against black people today?
You said this like 5 times, bro. Yes, systemic
Well,
racism.
I just want to understand. Well, can you say it one more time so I can understand?
Asking 5 times now. How
Yes.
does it exist? Where does it exist?
I
And
will
how does it
answer
affect
this
black
question.
people?
I will answer this question, and then I would like you both to articulate to me how systemic bigotry affects men today, how it affects white people today, how it affects Christians today. Fair enough? I'll answer your question first, and then you'll answer those 3 positions, correct?
I don't know why the whataboutism matters, but whatever.
It's tit for tat, right? In my belief, systemic racism has a very minimal effect on the black community today because most of the things that are considered systemic racism really aren't. The effect that was on that specific voting law in North Carolina, which is one example I could see would have been bad, that law was struck down. Other than that, most of the things that's called systemic racism doesn't actually affect black Americans. Okay, now you guys do white people, Christians, and men. Go ahead.
Okay,
Here's the thing. I answered the question regarding white people. I don't know of any systemic oppression against white people. If you believe there is systemic oppression against white people, I would ask that you show me some of those examples. One of the examples that you went into earlier, specifically with regard to systemic oppression against white people, was a law that you said that was giving money to people who were under a certain amount of thing, but they had to be not white. And that sounded a little that sounded like unreal. But I would need to see that law. But I understand. Okay, thank you. Which chat?
It's in the whereby chat.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, that sounds unbelievable, but I guess I'll look at that for a second. The thing is for me, the thing for me that I think that it should be evident here is when you're trying to right a wrong, then a lot of times the righting of the wrong is going to be somewhat discriminatory in the sense that you would be specifically giving whatever you're giving to the aggrieved party. So for example, say say a parent finds out that that one of their children stole $5 from their other sibling, right? So then at that point, then they would say, okay, and he already spent the money. Then the parent can say, okay, well, I give you guys $5 a month, $5 a week, or $5 a month, and whatever. And this month, since you stole money from him the last time, I will be giving your money that you would normally get, I will be giving it back to him. Now, for the person who did the original stealing to look at that and try to say in some sort of way that they're being aggrieved, I wouldn't say that that's right at all. I would say that this is righting the wrong that they did, and that wouldn't be racist or harmful or prejudiced against the individual that happened to.
May I?
Does that sound
Two
fair?
things. Right, 2 things real quick. One, you answered my question in the exact same way I answered Shark Zero, which neither of you found acceptable, in which you said, I'm unaware. If you give me examples, we could talk about it. That's exactly what I said about systemic racism against black Americans, and both of you said that was unacceptable. So that's one. Secondly, can you show me what the white people in Oakland that make less than $49,000 a year, who did they steal from?
So wait, no. Hold on. When you're talking about these systems of implementation, it's not like the white people themselves are required to give the money. It would be acknowledging the idea. First off, hold on. Do you acknowledge, before we even get to that specifically, the example that I gave you, do you acknowledge that in that case, that mother would not be prejudiced against the other person, and that the policy of returning or paying that person's money now to this person, would you acknowledge that that is not harmful to the individual who had originally done the sin? Would you agree that that's not necessarily harmful?
So I will say this, if you give me just a couple seconds to explain. In that specific situation where you had an individual steal from someone, taking that money that was stolen and giving it back is not harmful. That is not what we see occurring in all of these examples. The white people of Oakland that are poor that did not get this money did not steal money from anyone. Therefore, they should not be punished, period.
Okay, so great. So at least now we're at that one step. Now let's get to the second step. Say we find out that this mother, this parent, who was responsible for the money. Okay, she has been giving out unequal amounts of money to her children because she had a bias towards her youngest child. She considered him to be her favorite. So for a long time, her oldest child has been neglected as far as his financial allowance, and you find that he's only been getting $5 a week, whereas the oldest child was being given $25 a week. If once the father finds out about this and says this is actually wrong, this person has developed this amount of money for X amount of time, and we need to offset these advantages that we've given to this one child, it's unfair for the father to then implement a policy, a restorative policy, to offset this imbalance and this great harm that this mother has done, for the father to give the other child more money now to help him offset some of these damages. Would you say that that is unfair to the youngest child, now that for this amount of time while we're trying to offset these disadvantages that we've given to the oldest child, that we would be giving him more? Would you say that's unfair to the youngest child?
So two things to say to this for why this example doesn't apply. One, we're not talking about specific people that had money not given to them or stolen. We're talking about ancestors, not people today. So your example would be more apropos if you found out that someone's great grandma gave more money to their son than they gave to their daughter. So the great granddaughter now gets more money than the great grandson. It makes no sense whatsoever. Secondly, the reason this policy presumably was done in Oakland was because there were poor people struggling during COVID. So let's take your example, even if it did apply, which it doesn't, about the two children, right? So we'll just say a son and a daughter.
I need you to stop. Wait. Because you're abstracting the analogy.
No, I'm not abstracting.
You are. Let me make sure. Before we abstract the analogy and try to relate it back to talk about the policy, I need to understand that you understand the principle that I expressed and whether or not you agree or disagree with that principle. So keeping it just
no, I do not agree with the principle, as I'll articulate in a minute, because the idea is that the reason you're giving money to these people in Oakland was because they're struggling. And so in your situation, we would say child one got more money in the past, but they're struggling now. So therefore, through no fault of their own, they should not get this money now. It's an absurd analogy. Now, I could do the same. Like I could just spout off analogies that have nothing to do with anything and say,
you can do that. You can do that with the analogy. You can do that.
Right. Okay, that's what we'll do when we have our time. Sure.
Okay, good. So that's what you'll do when you have your time. So now we'll go ahead and address this analogy back as the way we were doing so. In that case, that father choosing to offset the damage that had been done to to his oldest child by giving more money, would you say that is unfair to the youngest child?
Yes.
Why would it be unfair?
You're abstracting my answer.
What?
You're abstracting my answer.
Rob,
I'm not going to go I've already explained why the analogy makes no sense. Do you think that if a banana was going unripe on the vine, that it would be justified for a farmer to remove that unripe banana and eat it before it became unripe? Do you think that would be fair?
Okay, so okay.
Don't abstract. Don't abstract. Don't abstract the analogy.
So we're not going to go. So the
okay, all right, both of you, stop. Both of you, stop. Shark Zero, go ahead. Yes, because it's getting like, I understand what's happening here. It's just the conversation's not going anywhere because it's like you said something dumb, so I'm gonna say something, and it's just like Shark Zero.
I never said anything dumb. That Rob Nora
it's the conversation. It's the conversation that's happening that it just needs to stop, and maybe we'll get back into it. Shark,
Rob,
go ahead.
So Rob, what do you think about police departments paying out settlements to the people that they've harmed? That money usually that goes to them is public money that's taken up in taxes and paid to a specific person that they hurt. Is that you're okay with that? Or
individuals, I would even be fine with reparations for people that were individually harmed by our government or even their parents. But I'm not fine with reparations for slavery or something like that because it occurred generation after generation ago. But yes, if you are directly harmed, then yes, you should be made whole. That's not the same.
I would agree. Well, can I just? I want to just follow this up a little bit. Do you agree with let's say a company? I don't know. Let's say a fertilizer company. They don't reveal that they have carcinogens in their fertilizer, and everybody who bought the fertilizer is and they got like a grant from the government. They got two quadrillion billion gazillion dollars from the government, and that's taxpayer money, and they use it to make the fertilizer, and then there's like a settlement of that, and then there's like a class action lawsuit. You didn't even use the fertilizer. You never got hurt. Are you okay with that payment?
I mean, these analogies are getting out of control. We're jumping through a lot of hoops to justify
I'm just
actually
asking you.
discriminating people based on their race. We're jumping through a lot of it. So the question is, if a fertilizer company behaved in a poor way and people then filed a class action lawsuit, should someone be allowed to join that class action lawsuit that was not negatively impacted by the fertilizer company? No.
They shouldn't be, even though they bought it.
The idea of a class action lawsuit is that you have been wronged because you were misled and the product that you purchased somehow had a negative effect on you or did not work as advertised. Therefore, it incurred some penalty to you.
So you only should be able to file it if you have cancer?
Yes. So, for example, should I be able to sue the tobacco companies if I didn't get cancer and I never used tobacco?
Well, they say specifically that can give you cancer. My fertilizer did not tell me that it would give me cancer.
At one point, it didn't. At one point, it didn't.
Well, it's okay. Shark Zero, you can give that to him. Okay, good. So any of the people that got cancer from that fertilizer, you think that they should be able to get restitution for those things?
Yes, right? Absolutely.
Cool.
Okay. And that's great. And I totally agree. Anybody that experienced direct hardship from anything that was harmful should be able to get any of those.
No. That's different. That's a different. That's
okay. I'm sorry. We're just in that specific example. I was trying to relate it to the thing.
Wait, I want to ask you a question.
Let me just finish this one point. Then you can jump in. It's
okay.
Okay.
Like, what if my mom died from the fertilizer? Do you think I should be?
It's okay. He already granted us. He gave us the point. That's all right.
Sorry.
We win. That's it. Okay. So now let's move forward to another one. Okay. Like, let me ask. When it came to the country obviously we paid restitution to Japanese in internment camps because of the fact that we put them in internment camps during World War II. We felt like it was something that was disgusting that we shouldn't have done. At that point, we were only giving restitution to Japanese who were in the internment camps. Any Japanese Americans that weren't in internment camps, they didn't get the money. And so on and so forth. Do you feel like there were other white people who lived in the same regions as those Japanese people who were relocated to the internment camps? Do you feel like it was racist to give the Japanese things because they were struggling as a result of what the government did while not giving it also to white people?
When the government, if white people were interred, they deserved money. Asian Americans or Japanese were interred, then they deserved money. If you weren't interred, you didn't deserve money. If your ancestor was interred, you don't deserve money. Clear enough? Now, I just want to, real quick, I want to leave Cutsleeve get in here, and I want to just let it be known, me and Cutsleeve will do 20 minutes worth of analogies that don't apply to anything later as well, if that's what the debate's going to be, instead of actually talking about the issues. So go ahead, Cutsleeve.
Oh, okay. That's crazy. You guys are going to go back to back. I'm not going to be able to address what you just said. That's fine. I guess you guys.
He hasn't had a chance to talk. You keep going on from these absurd analogies.
Sure.
Yeah. Shark Zero brought up an amazing point. Say you found a relic, and you just discovered your great mother got cancer from a tobacco company that still exists today. And you find out that tobacco company has new head owner, new company manager, new everything. Do you still have the right, or are you still entitled to get money from that tobacco company? Because you could make the argument that, I don't know, if that my great-great-great-great-mother didn't have cancer, then she might be richer, which means her daughters might be richer, which means her daughters might be richer, which means I could have been richer. So actually, I'm entitled to sue the balls out of any tobacco company that gave my mother cancer decades ago. Like, do you like? So like, my question to you is, when does a line stop? If I find like a relic that's like my great-great-great-great-grandmother like got cancer from a tobacco company, do I get the rights to sue that tobacco company?
What? How far away are you trying to say this is? But
about like slavery far away, like 500 years ago.
I'm sorry. How long ago? Can you say that again?
Let's say 5 generations.
5 generations. I would say it would really depend on how bad those damages are. You can take that to court and you'd be able to arbitrate that and figure out what type of damage would have been done. I don't know. Maybe it would be something like, well, hang on, buddy.
Wait, to specify, I don't want you to answer like a wrong question. Morally, in your mind, do you think that person is entitled to like the funds?
The funds of that lawsuit?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's see. How do we figure this out now? If one of your family members was hurt, and then there has to be restitution that has to be paid, you usually pay it to next of kin.
All right, so I just want to say, so what that answer was, you could see, literally our country grinds to a halt. It literally just becomes people trying to find ancestors that were aggrieved by a company, by someone, and saying that I'm owed an indeterminate amount of money. It literally is the end of the country. That's what they're advocating for.
That's not really the end of. That's not really the end of the country. One really big thing is that it's not just slavery that we're talking about. There was like the hundreds of years of slavery, the hundreds of years of segregation and Jim Crow, and then now maybe, I don't know, maybe another 100 years of denying that was even a problem.
You're moving forward, okay? I didn't even get a straight answer. Are they morally entitled to the money or not?
Sure, bud.
Yeah, they are?
Sure.
So every single person who was harmed by a company 5 generations ago is entitled to sue that company. Even if it's new management, new head owner, new everything. They're still entitled, right?
I don't know what you do know, like a company, like a corporation. There's a reason why it's a corporation. So you can sue like the actual entity. It doesn't matter if it's new people, the entity still exists. Sure. Do you really think that you should be able to get away from like a company should be able to get away with liability if they fire the head and then hire a new one?
No, I didn't even wait specifically. You know what? You're right. It doesn't matter if they're like new management. Okay. I think
we're going so far down this road.
No. I just want you to answer one simple question.
I agree with Fanatic. Honestly, this I don't really like where this conversation is going. Can we just I know me saying something is like might sound biased, but like let's just have the conversation about systemic racism like today. You know, like the lefties say, you know, well obviously this is a form of racism, and then the righties say, well no, that isn't. Like, can we just do something like that? Like, you know what? These rabbit holes are. I'm just trying to make the conversation more. Like.
You know what? You're extremely right. Here's my study. All right, here's the study by the U.S. Sentencing Commission. All right, it's a big study. All right, black offenders receive 19.1% longer prison sentences than similarly situated white male offenders.
Okay, that doesn't prove racism.
So Rob, I'd like to ask a couple questions. Okay.
Sure.
So if there's a white person and the black person, all right, and they have the same priors and they have the same crime and they're in similar districts, and one gets a prison sentence 20% longer, can you just like hypothesize why that may be? If
Sure. Right. So you're saying that everything is exactly equal as far as their priors and all that stuff.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. Okay. There could be many reasons. One, it could be because there was a judge that was more harsh that decided, regardless of skin color, to do that. Second, it could be because the lawyer that was obtained by both of those people had a skill gap. Third, it could be because the jury that maybe was responsible for sentencing or responsible for finding guilt was more biased in one situation than the other. There's a litany of reasons that could occur. Oftentimes we see that actually studies show that African-American judges are also more likely to give harsher sentences to people in disparate ways like this, and oftentimes it's because people that live in these communities actually want harsher sentences because they see the crime is so bad there. For example, there's often talks about how crack disparities between cocaine laws and the sentencings between crack and cocaine prove because crack is used more on average by African Americans and cocaine's used more on average by other races, that the discrepancy in those sentencing laws would be because of racism. But when you look, the reason that crack laws were harsher was because black inner city people were tired of the crack epidemic leading to crime around their city. So they're the ones who requested that the laws be harsher. Now, I have a counter question.
That's not true. That's not true.
Okay, we can talk about, but real quick, we'll talk about my counter example. So I'll put, let me see, real quick.
Before you give your counter example, can we just address the thing that you just said?
Okay, sure.
Sure. So absolutely, African Americans were not asking for harsher for harsher sentences. What African Americans were asking for was equal opportunity employment. They were asking for better drug treatment programs and better policing. And better policing for them did not mean more. They wanted more after school programs and things like that to help preventative drug measures. When that crime bill was drafted, there was the Black Caucus, which literally got together and drafted a completely different alternative competing bill that they were asking and advocating for, which included so much more materials than just I'm sorry, which didn't include harsher prison sentences. The NAACP at the time directly spoke out against that bill. It was after that the Republicans started negotiating and started trying to offer significantly worse bills, which were going to cut the vast majority of the spending for preventative measures and things of that nature, that they felt like there was a dilemma and that they had to capitulate to the Republican Party in order to not get a further draconian bill. So this wasn't African Americans asking for harsher prison sentences. That's not what was asked for. They had an entirely competing bill. We have access to that bill. They were definitely not pushing for that. It was totally different measures. That's not true at all.
Yeah, just
was
a
that Chester,
ballpark.
New York's first black governor rolled back mandatory minimum sentencing laws first passed in 73. Earlier this week, another black leader, let's see. Go ahead, cut sleeve, and I'll read the relevant part here.
Because this is a debate about impacts, how big it is, just like on a broad scale. How does like systematic racism like impact the average black person today? How much better would the average black person's life be if they were white? Would it be like 10%, 5%, 20% better?
I think that's a kind of ridiculous question, but what we can look at, what we can look at is we can see that when we want to say about the effects of systemic oppression today, so we can see like things like houses. When it comes to people's houses, I think they said that black houses were appraised 25% less than their white counterparts, even if you like controlled for size of the house, square footage, upgrades, and things like that. There's clearly discrimination there. There have been a number of operations in which people have gotten their houses appraised, then gotten a second appraisal for using white people and having them put their pictures up over the house. So literally keeping everything else the same, just the pictures, and having white people be there for it, and that they've been able to get a 25% increase when it comes to their home appraisals. So that obviously has a huge impact. Then when you want to start looking at things like obviously some of the historic systemic oppression can obviously have effects today. I mean, it was just in the 30s when they were doing when they were doing some of those really big, the largest the FHA loans, which had a humongous impact on people's real estate, and which of course has affected people's ability to go to work and things like that. But more importantly, we have literally one generation. More importantly, okay, here. More importantly, one generation ago, we had we just passed the civil rights movement was literally one generation ago, and my mother's generation is when they passed in 1968 the ability the Fair Housing Act, which allowed African Americans to buy homes in white neighborhoods, right? Like that was in 1968. That was one generation ago. So when we start trying to consider the impact of those things, like we can look at my grandmother just passed in October of 2019. So in that case, that house that was left to my mother was purchased before the FHA, before the Fair Housing Act was even passed. So then that inheritance is going to be negatively impacted by that systemic oppression, which affects my mother's money to this day, right?
Yeah,
like that's something that just happened. So these things are really, really like we can still see these
Wait. Let me
one generation ago.
let me respond here. Yeah, let me respond here. Fanatic, all of you, you're debating a ghost. No one's gonna deny the effect of or like deny the existence of systematic racism. Now, what I really want to point to, because you couldn't tell me how much it impacted us, so I'm not really sure why we're debating like impact. We can like throw studies at each other, but if we're not gonna say how much systematic racism impacts the average African American, then I don't care about the conversation. Now, let's specifically like direct this conversation more towards a solution-based a method. I think the solution is individuals. I think we should look to the individual with solution. We've looked to systematic change for a solution time and time again, and it hasn't worked. Government money just can't solve the problem. Can we find some common ground here that it's ultimately the individual, even though environmental impacts can cause like other environments to lessen your individuality? It's still up to your choice to rise above those circumstances.
Cutsley, the question you keep asking is incredibly vacuous, and I'll explain why. When we're talking about systemic racism, typically, if you want to run a study, because if you're going to try to discover systemic oppression, it's not going to be about an individual. Systemic racism is about a broader thing, something that will affect normative outcomes. So asking me how it's affecting an individual is obviously going to be ridiculous. And then if you're going to try to ask how systemic racism as a whole, which is a very broad subject encompassing so many various systems within our country, right? Like no matter what, everyone's going to be affected by the banking system, the educational system, the criminal justice system, the voting system, the election system, right? Like there's so many different systems that are going to be affecting and impacting people in their lives. So then you're going to need some incredibly broad, multivariate study in order to determine the exact number of give you a percentage or some sort of effect of systemic racism, which is again an extremely broad topic. So I can't give you that. I don't know that anyone's done a study to do that. And we could try our best to try to like determine the actual things, but that's actually not how you would study systemic racism.
Okay, real quick. Okay,
let me finish. What you would do is you would look at individual systems and you would try to see those individual systems.
Also, if you guys want to know, usually it's ascribed between 16 and 70 trillion dollars that racism has cost Black Americans.
And we can find like a 19% disparity for similarly situated African Americans, right? Then I can give you that number. So I would say for the African Americans who happen to be under that would be the effect there, and 19% increase in system and whatever. Now, how many African Americans that affects? It's still going to be the minority, and so on and so forth. But all we can do is give you specific numbers. We can't answer that really broad, vacuous question. That's not
okay. Okay, so it was an evasion of the question. We could see how that doesn't really add up, right? So, for example, he says, well, if we see that blacks are 19% more likely to be incarcerated or have negative effects of the criminal justice system, the judicial system, that proves. Is that not what you said? You said 19%. Go ahead, explain that number real quick.
Sorry, I said there was a 19% sentencing disparity between African Americans and similarly situated whites. So that means
great. Got it. You had a lot of time to talk there. So yeah, we can see that according to studies from Michigan, which for some reason it's behind a paywall right now, but from Michigan, it shows that the disparities between whites and blacks, the disparity between men and women is 6 times worse than the disparity between whites and blacks. We can see that men are incarcerated 15 times more than women. That's not 19%, that's 1,500%. So we can see all this stuff exists. Does that prove, based on these discrepancies, that we can say, well, we can see that systemic bigotry against men? We don't know about individual actions and things like that. All we could do is look at the data set and show. Now, this is what I said would be said earlier in the debate. I said this is what they'll do. They'll point to a disparity and say that disparity proves systemic racism. That is not proof of systemic racism. It could be that there are all sorts of reasons why that disparity ends up existing. Again, we could see, are you willing to say at this point, if the disparity between men and women is worse than the disparity between whites and blacks, then we should put even more focus on how our system is bigoted against men. You talked previously, you said, I have relatives or friends that are in jail and you happen to think it's because of their skin color. But isn't it true that it's even more likely it's because they're men? And what are we doing about the systemic bigotry against men in the criminal justice system?
Okay, so you asked me. Go ahead, Shark. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sure. Oh, sir. Okay. All right then. For
I'll
one,
answer after.
you keep doing these incredible whataboutisms.
It's not whataboutism.
It is literally whataboutism. You literally just say what about that? What about men? And listen, if you want an answer to your question, the answer. Well, here's one thing. For one, you were comparing rate of arrests to 19% is longer prison sentence and not not what the number, I forgot exactly the number that you were comparing, like how many times men are arrested compared to women? What was that specifically?
It was all fact. The Michigan study says 6 times worse in all measurable facets.
Okay. No one ever said that there isn't any systemic discrimination to men in the criminal justice system. Actually,
just real quick, Michigan law student found that crime for men receives 63% longer sentences than women. So It's 19 for blacks to whites. It's 63 for men to women.
Cool. No one, for one, incredible whataboutism. We're talking about systemic racism, for one. Two,
you brought up real quick.
You have to let me speak, Rob. There is systemic discrimination against men in the criminal justice system. This is incredibly true, and we should definitely work on that. The only thing is, lots of people really don't care about men. And that sucks, because that is absolutely something that we should be working on and to fix. And these problems actually compound on top of systemic racism. I'm not here, unlike some people, I don't want to do an oppression Olympics, as some people may call it, when it comes to men and black people, specifically. When it comes to this, black people are, and I would like to really understand why you think men get harsher prison sentences to that degree compared to women. I think that also calls back to some sexism as well. When it comes to this, you originally, when I asked you the question, what are some reasons that black people could be experiencing higher sentences compared to white people, and you said you gave these specific things. My question would be, wouldn't that be accounted for once we take in averages? This is an average. Wouldn't those things flatten out over time? There are thousands and thousands of cases that they studied. I wouldn't imagine literally every single one of them, unless there's a really big reason why literally every single one of them, the black person had a even harsher judge than the white person did. I think that'd be really interesting.
Okay.
Wait, can I say something? I want to.
No, you can't. Are we going to go back to back, or are we going to leave it right? Isn't that what you said earlier?
Well, so then I'll address the original thing you said then. Go ahead.
All right. So first off, Shark Zero started off this debate before Fanatic and Cutsleeve came here, talking specifically about systemic racism and how we could also see gender pay gap and things like that. Then as soon as we talk about the one thing he wants to talk about, which is law enforcement, sentencing rates and things like that, all of a sudden it's whataboutism. We don't want to talk about it. Second, the reason that this applies is it directly applies to the principle, which you start to get to it there, which is we don't just look at a data set and say, oh, if men are sentenced 63% longer than women, that proves bigotry. That is not what we do. And it's amazing to me how people on the left are trained when it's brought up in this context to say, oh, we can't look. Do men commit more crimes? Do men actually do things that warrant law enforcement being incarcerating them more? Like, all of a sudden they just forget all that, because they know if they make that claim, which is obviously factually true, then it buttresses against the claim they're making when it comes to race. They can't do it, so they have to pretend. I don't know. Why would men be getting arrested more? Men commit crime at the exact same rate as women. I don't know. I'm just puzzled. Clearly, if the data set's off, it proves racism. That's exactly why I brought up this point, because Fanatic's point was, if we see that there's this sentencing disparity, that proves systemic racism. This was in direct response to Cutsleeve saying, at what point do we say that personal action has something to do with this? He said, well, I can't. It's a vacuous comment. We can't really answer it, because all we could do is show you the data that they're sentenced 19% longer. But there's all sorts of reasons. You say it wouldn't be the case every time. That, I don't think you understand what the word average means. It doesn't have to be every time. There's all sorts of problems that occur in the inner city. Again, we can see this debate goes exactly as I knew it would, right? Except it's the added cherry of saying, no, it's okay to be systemically racist towards white people and things like that. Please. It's okay to be racist against white people through systems and things like that, because if we do that, it's just the intent's good. The intent's good when we have systemic racism against white people. That's a good intent. So we've still never got to the question. Again, all of this only makes sense if you're talking about how racism of the past, systemic racism of the past, cool, gotcha. Redlining, Jim Crow, gotcha. Like, that stuff's all terrible. If you say that the people today, all of these actions that we see, all of these negative numbers are directly responsible to that. Correlation does not equal causation. You have not proven that. And again, we could see that it's constantly this. It's just the constant racism explains everything. It explains all these problems. No one has given any evidence as to how racism explains it.
Please. What the hell? First off, I wouldn't have agreed to that. When you asked me that stupid question, it's an incredibly vacuous one, right? Like, so hey, here's a disparity in sentencing. So is that discrimination? I don't know the outcome of that. I don't know what the cause of that is, rather, I'm sorry. That's why you need studies. So when you have studies that literally control for different variances so that we can determine what the actual causal relationship for these things are, then you can start determining that. So when I pointed out the 19% sentencing disparity, that 19% sentencing disparity was when they controlled for the exact same crime and similarly situated, meaning that we needed to make sure that the individuals didn't have priors, or if they had priors, we would compare people who had priors with people who had priors. We would compare the degree of the violence versus the degree of the violence. We would compare whether or not the victim died versus whether or not the victim died. So we would control for various factors to determine that they were similarly situated, and then after controlling for all of these various factors, then we come to the conclusion that this is or is not a result of some sort of racial component or racial discrimination. That's what the purpose of a study is. So if you're just pointing at me a statistic alone can't prove what's causing it. You can find differences in outcomes that are based on personal choice. I totally, freely, readily admit that. That's not the same thing as a study that controls for various factors in order to determine that there is an unfounded and unfair disparity. So in my thing, that would be the cause of that. That's what the purpose of these people who run studies do, where they controlled for those things. And what you're doing is just giving me a stat. So no, I wouldn't grant you that. So your entire soliloquy that you just gave had nothing to do with any of my positions whatsoever, because I'm not arguing that, hey, if we find a disparity, that automatically implies racism. That's just not the way things work there. That's not the way logic works. That's not the way studies work. That's not the way my argument works. Please stop arguing against straw men.
Also, this
Okay,
like
and
really,
again,
really,
you've
really simple thing. I think it's really interesting, Rob. I don't want to say anything about you. Okay. I think it's really interesting when I asked why when similarly situated people of different races get disparaging sentences, you said, well, when it was like men and women, you were like, well, men commit crime more. And if they're already arrested, I think that's one of the really big reasons that sexism that you wanted to say exists. People see men commit crime more. They think they're more violent, so they deserve harsher sentences.
Yeah.
Right. So I already gave, right.
Oh.
I'm not saying that. What I already gave is the rationale for why judge it. There's all sorts of reasons why there could be harsher sentences. For example, it could
That'd
be
be a
that the
sexist
specific
rationale.
courts. No, it wouldn't be a sexist rationale. The idea would be that there could be all sorts of other things that aren't being, just because you say studies show that all things were equal. That's not the case. Study, like you might say that, you haven't presented the study, you haven't shown the methodology of the study.
It's in the
You just-
Discord. My bad. It's in the chat.
Okay,
Where you put yours.
sure. So there's all sorts of things that it can't control for. For example, it can't control for where courts are that traditionally
It does.
have
It controls
black
for that already.
sentences.
It does control
Okay.
for that.
Oh, you didn't even know what I was going to say. So it does control for that. So you're
It controls
saying
for where
that
courts are. That was what you just said, and I said yes, it does control for that.
and so it literally somehow is able to control for, if you have a rural court where there's all white people, it's somehow controlled causally for an inner city court that has mostly black people. It controlled for that.
Wait, so you can control for specific courts within specific states, within specific counties, and then determine those numbers based on those things too. You
Well, let's
do
see the
realize,
study. So the study's
Yeah,
in the
there's-
chat. That's what you're saying?
Yes,
yeah,
it's in
called
the
it's called a
whereabout chat.
Bayesian analysis. I'll find you one right now. Hold on.
It was done by the U.S. Sentencing Commission.
Right. So what we see is, again, what you see is there's all sorts of arguments. People just say, well, it leads to, it's all things were equal. These people were sentenced. So what's the number? 19% worse? That's the argument?
19%
Yes.
longer sentences.
Sentenced to 19% longer. And it factored in things like the quality of attorney they were able to get. It factored that in.
Well, I'm not sure necessarily, but I really think that on a massive average scale, if black people find it really hard to find quality attorneys compared to white people, I think that could also point to really interesting disparities when it comes to systemic racism.
Because then the
as well.
disparity would be poor people versus race.
Well, you could really
So you're saying
talk
it'd be
about
an
why.
intersection between those two.
Yeah.
No, see, and this is the problem. So once more, we see that people say, so again, the problem would be, what does systemic racism have to do? If me and Fanatic both get arrested and we both theoretically are making $20,000 a year, so we're very poor. We both get arrested and we both get sentenced the exact same because neither of us had money for a good attorney. Why the hell does it matter to me that supposedly Fanatic, like his situation's because of systemic racism, but my situation's just because what? Because of poor decisions in my life or my ancestors' lives?
That's a beautiful question, Rob, and that's exactly the point here. It's that if both of you and I both make $20,000 and we controlled specifically for that, and both of us committed the exact same crime, what the study would show, what studies have shown, is that even though we both have the same whatever, and we have the same amount of representation, we will still get disparate outcomes. Because of my race, I'm likely to get a longer sentence, and that's the problem. If you try to reduce this conversation to something of just economics, they can control, as they have done previously in other studies, for different levels of income, different levels of economics, and have still arrived at disparities. I have a study right here that I will be linking you right now. I'm gonna this one specific. Yeah, I'm putting it in the whereby. Let me see how I do that. There we go. This was in the way. This
also,
one
sorry. Go
they're
ahead.
controlling
Don't
for
want to say that.
firearm related crimes, and in that they found that African Americans, similarly situated, were still subject to a crazy disparity, even if we controlled for all of the other factors. So that study does control for those various things.
Go ahead, Aftershock. I'll read through the study here.
Yeah. So specifically going back to my point, even if I can find you a socioeconomic analysis that put men in jail longer for the same crimes that women did, would you then agree that there is systematic oppression against men?
Yes, I would.
Yes.
If you can show me studies that correctly control for the factors to make sure that they're equal, and we find that there's a disparity for men versus women, then yeah, I would say that there is oppression against men. And I probably already readily I've seen studies that have demonstrated that men are oppressed. There's no disagreement to that. There are biases against men when it comes to, obviously, when it comes to child court, obviously when it comes to whatever. So I don't have to list all of them. So I readily accept the idea that we do have biases against men. That's true. I don't understand the whataboutism though. Like, that's never been denied.
Okay, so
Oh wait, I'm sorry. Wait, one last thing. I didn't get to address the thing that Rob said earlier because yeah, he insisted that cuts whatever. So the thing is, yeah, when you mention that men are treated differently, I agree that is systemic oppression against men that exists. No one's ever denying that. That I don't understand. Like, that is completely a whataboutism. Then your question was, should we put more focus on bigotry against men? If you can show me studies that show that, I don't think we should put more studies on that. I would say that we should probably put studies on that as well. I mean, we should put more focus. We should put focus on that as well. I think anytime where there's any form of oppression, I think it makes all the sense to deal with that. If you can show me, as I asked you earlier, if you can show me oppression against white people, I'm more than willing to address any sort of racism or systemic oppression against white people. I am completely willing to address that.
You literally
you can say I'm not if you want to. I am willing to do that, but you would need to show me.
And I could prove it. I'm
going to finish my sentence anyway. I'm going to finish my sentence, and then afterwards, then you can go ahead and go on. You would need to show me that there is systemic racism against white people that has the intent of oppressing white people, and it isn't something, I'm going to finish. You can laugh maniacally if you want to, and it needs to be something that's not specifically geared at offsetting previous damage against black people. So doing restorative justice aimed at African Americans who have systemically been oppressed, I do not consider that to be racist against white people. I think that's a reach.
Right. And so here's what you see.
Yeah,
Here's the rub, right? So wait, just real quick. And here's the rub, right? It's always our racism is okay. That's always it. It's okay for our government to disenfranchise you based on your skin color if the reason is it helps my group and injustices that I claim that my group suffered through in the past. So any amount of racism, 100 years from now, we could discriminate against white people, Asian people, Hispanic. It doesn't matter. We could discriminate against any of them because all you have to do is say, I feel that this is restorative justice. I feel that this current racism, this current literal, like by the book definition of systemic racism, a system of power literally judging people and punishing or rewarding based on their skin color. As long as you say, the reason I'm doing this is for restorative justice, then it's okay. And the reality is this leads to sort of a soft bigotry of low expectations that ultimately makes things worse in the very communities that they claim to be solving. So we could see under the mantra of systemic racism, we need to solve it. We lead to things like defund the police, which directly leads to homicides and crimes occurring more in inner cities. We can see that in polled around 60%. Let me finish my sentence. So we could already see that blacks polled over 60% of them say they want equal or more policing in these inner city neighborhoods. And yet we continually talk about the defunding. We can see in places like Portland, other places, homicides are up over 100% in some of these places after we've defunded the police. We can see a scramble for them to start refunding the police because the idea of all of this is because of systemic racism, we need to remove this stuff, has actually led to more violence. That's what the net effect of it has been happening. And as long as it's said, well, as long as the intent was restorative justice, it's okay. It's okay to blatantly be racist. I mean, we literally had, for example, the CDC saying, yes, our solution on who to give the vaccine for would lead to possibly 6% more people dying, but it's okay because they're majoritarily white. It's okay. So the intent, those people dying because of how we're recommending giving out the vaccine, it's okay. Because our intent is okay. So this systemic racism is okay. And you could listen to people wax philosophically and sophistically about how it's okay to be blatantly racist, to have a law that blatantly says we will give money based on this race or we'll punish people based on this race and say that it's okay, but it's not. It's still racism. It's systemic racism. And you see people literally cheering for it here.
So
okay,
Rob,
so I need really quickly. I'm sorry. I need the moderator to help me really quick because I think Do I have someone muted in the conversation? Because I keep feeling like Rob is completely debating random points that no one here is making. I don't think any person here has brought up defund the police, but I guess someone is that I don't know that I can't see. Because clearly no one's talking about defund the police or associating us with like, oh, leftists who are talking about like specific vaccine recommendations. I don't know who these straw men are, but there's got to be something that's happening with my audio that I'm muting. So can you guys help me? Like maybe there's a server mute going on. I don't know what's going on. Because Rob, you didn't address literally anything that I'm talking about. I've made my points over and over again, and you just keep on trying to skirt past them. So getting back to those points one more time. The idea is
repeat yourself.
if the idea is because I gotta repeat myself because literally after I make my statement, you literally just move on to yeah and spin it or go all around the world, and I don't know what the freak you're talking about. So the argument that I just made here is specifically if there is punitive damage, and I'm sorry, there's another thing that I had to write down. You said as long as you can say I feel this is because of oppression. I don't think it's really that simple, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous to even make that argument. I don't think I'm arguing based on feelings whatsoever. I do think that, as you've admitted before, there are numbers that we can prove that exist. There was previous systemic oppression that we can quantify. That's not just someone's feelings. We can literally calculate it. So we can determine some of the outcomes and some of the effects on people's lives by this previous existing systemic oppression, which wasn't that long ago, directly impacted my mother, directly impacted people that are living today. So we can look at those things and then see that these things need to be offset. There should be some sort of fix or reparation to that, some sort of restorative measures to offset the damage done by literally every level of government. That's what we're asking for. We're not talking about feelings. We're not talking about opinions. We're talking about facts. That's number one. Number two, people are asking for defunding the police. That hasn't been my argument. That's not what we're talking about here. That's literally not what we're talking about here. That's a straw man. Please stop it. Thank you for the subscription.
Can cut sleeve go?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So firstly, we are all using whataboutism. I mean, not us. The lefties are using whataboutism wrong. Whataboutism is a counter accusation to deflect from the point. One, Rob never made any counter accusation. We're talking about systematic racism. He's just bringing up other forms of systematic racism. And again, even if he had brought up a counter argumentation, he would directly refute your point. So even if he directly refutes your point and then brings up a counter accusation, that is not whataboutism. As long as he addresses your point, it's not whataboutism. Next, you can, even if you point to the studies, and even if you guys can do more debating about that, but even if all of your studies are true and it's socioeconomically proven that black people have higher disparities than white men, you just proved that systematic racism existed in that area. Okay, none of us has ever said that systematic racism didn't exist. We're debating about how much it impacted and the solutions about it. And the solutions are more concrete. So I want to get into those. Leftist solutions have always been bigger government, which gave us the war on poverty, which is a massive failure that left many people fatherless, which gave us the crime bill, which left many people locked up for stupid things like marijuana drugs, which gave us the social safety nets that disenfranchised multiple African Americans. The Republicans have always advocated for individuality, aka lower government intervention, which one, lowers taxes, two, it gives you more ability to do what you want in life. So what I'm saying is, even if we can identify the problem, the solutions, Republicans have always been right on. Republicans have always been the one who said, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, do the individuality, and let many people with they focus on the fatherless. They focus on the fatherless homes. They focus on the family structures, and they focus on maximizing your choice, so we can have equity for all, not equality for all.
And real quick, Fanatic, the study you sent me, can you highlight where it says that they controlled for all these factors?
I guess I can try to look. I can look for the methodology because in the methodology where they tell you other things.
You clearly saw it. So I've looked all through. Perhaps I missed it. But go ahead. Also, I assume you can find it very fast because you said you clearly read it. So
cool. Hey Rob, Fanatic, I understand your point, and I think we may have a better way to tackle this. So Rob, I come from a long line of service men and women. Both of my parents spent 30 years in the military, and their parents spent years in the military. The thing is, one really big thing is, coming back from World War II, black people were excluded from a lot of the benefits that the VA gave. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that there were
lots of housing plans, like education plans, and education is one of the really big ways to build generational poverty. Is that right? Do you believe in that? It is a big it is a big way to build
Sure,
generational
education
property.
yes,
But-
I agree with that.
Wealth, right? Cool.
Sure.
So if this is true, right? You said that it's very racist to give money to one group of people based on race than another group of people based on race. Do you believe it's racist to discriminate against one people based on race and not another?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So my question is, Rob, how do we fix this problem in that community? You agree that was wrong to do, and you agree that like generational poverty was probably created in a very large way. My parents both grew up in the ghetto because they weren't their parents weren't afforded the VA benefits, weren't giving good housing, redlined. It was very bad for them. Lots of their family members died. My question would be, how do we fix that problem then without targeting Black people?
What we do is we target people that need help based on the needs that they have, right? What we don't do is say we target them based on race. Again, we come to this question. If me and you, Sharksy, are literally today in the exact same economic situation, why does it matter what situation our grandparents were in? If we need help, we need help. Why would we help one, like in Oakland? Why would we say, oh, you're Black, you're entitled to help, but sorry, Rob, you're white? Why is it that I'm punished by the sins of my father and that all of a sudden that I, because of things that maybe my family had nothing to do with, but I share a skin color with with people in government that did something bad in the past, that now all of a sudden the government doesn't work for me, but it works for you. And the only difference, all things controlled for, if we're controlling for, the wealth we have, the need we have for that money, you get help from the government. I don't, based on your race. It makes no sense. I have no problem helping poor people if the argument is, well, helping poor people would disproportionately help Black people because more Black people are poor. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is the policies we see that purposely discriminate or reward people based on their skin color. If we're going to help people that need help, fine, we help them. We don't do so based on skin color. That is literal systemic racism.
Okay, so here's the difference right here, right? Like the idea is typically the government would probably start making some of these restorative measures based on skin color because some of the government's previous laws and things were discriminatory based on skin color. So when we had things like Plessy versus Ferguson, there was literally color definitions codified within the law. Same way when it came to redlining. Redlining was a discriminatory law based on race. The housing laws literally forbade people from selling their properties to African Americans. The GI Bill was racistly implemented such that Blacks were the hyper minority of people who received the GI Bill, even in the cases where they qualified. When we look at our educational system, segregation, separate but equal, was clearly not equal. There were plenty of times where funding was discriminatorily applied to different schools. So when you start looking at these things and you want to offset changes and things that have been done, when you start looking at, like I've mentioned, mandatory minimum sentences and how they were disproportionately or disparately applied, when you start looking at the way that these things impacted individuals, and you find that the reason that they were implemented in the first place was on color lines, then the idea that you would use color lines to determine who you would pay restitution to in order to offset these things makes all the sense in the world. So, likewise, here's just a really simple example. If you look at things like colleges, and you find that colleges were racially discriminating and despite qualifications and things like that, they weren't allowing African Americans to attend the school only on the basis of their race, regardless of GPA, regardless of SAT score, regardless of all of those other factors. If they were being excluded, then the idea that we would try to offset the damages caused by that exclusion by colored lines makes all the sense in the world to any sensible person. Typically, when you're restoring things, you have to target the thing that was originally harmed. And in this case, that would be a specific race.
So it's unresponsive. Two things. One, I'm still waiting for that methodology. You said you'd provide it. So I'm shocked
looking
because
for it.
Real quick. I'm shocked you have to look for it. You were so certain that you knew the methodology. Yeah. So it's shocking that you're looking for it. I'm still waiting. So when you get that, please. When you get that, please point it out.
They tell you where the methodology is. But here it is. That's
cool. Let's see the methodology. It says all those things. Go ahead, highlight it, and then you can read it when it's your turn to speak. Secondly, again, I'm
not going to spend 2 hours. I'm not going to spend 2. Look,
you don't have the methodology.
If you want, we can have another conversation specifically on this topic, in which I will provide you the methodology and all those things specifically on this thing. I didn't come here preparing specifically to discuss on this single iota of the
You had your chance to talk. I get your filibustering. You had your chance to talk. I get your filibustering during my time to talk. I get it. I get it.
Hold on. No, guys, hold on. All right, Fanatic, real quick, and then we'll go to you, Rob, and then no one. What do you call it?
Interrupting him at all. Like, yeah, I'm going to finish my point. So anyway, so the idea is I didn't come here with this specific thing. Like I said, systemic oppression is a very broad topic. I happen to have a bevy of studies on me, but now you're asking me for specifics like methodology. I didn't have the methodology pre-highlighted. I think it's absurd to ask me to do that in the middle of a conversation where you expect me to still be a participant in the conversation. Now we can have a conversation, as I was going to say, specifically about this topic on this specific policy on this specific study, and then I will go into all of those details. I cannot provide that for you now. What I can say is because I've read this study before,
Holy
I have
shit.
its methodology.
We got it.
I do.
Nice little interruption there. Right. Got it. Okay, that's cool. I can talk for a long time too. No problem. So, everyone can see what happens. Like he brought up the methodology.
Here we go.
He said, "Oh, this equals for everything." He brought it up. He said, "No, it does all that. It takes into account." Remember, he specifically said it takes into account the location of the courts. He said that. Here's. I said, "Can you show me a study?" He says, "Here." Then he presents it, and when I asked him to present the methodology, he can't. He's just bullshitting. And that's the problem. I'm not even saying that there's not a study out there that might say this, but this is exactly what I'm talking about of people that just want to say racism, systemic racism without any proof of it whatsoever. He's literally just citing a study that he just Googled. He doesn't know what the methodology is. And he's just throwing shit against the wall, hoping that I'll say, oh, geez, if the study says that. He didn't anticipate me to actually go through the study and make sure that this study said. Now he's going to be desperately searching for a second study after we've already proved the disingenuous nature of what he said. That's what he does. Like, that's how it's going to go. This is what happens so often. This is why you can't take people seriously that want to blame everything on systemic racism, because they'll just try to bullshit you. They'll try to say that they have proof for stuff, and then when you get into the
stream, can you interrupt?
So he just tries to get lost in the minutia of it, hoping that you won't actually do the investigation to show that they're just talking out their ass. Secondly, everything that he said here is exactly as I said it would be. They're literally like, go back to those ridiculous analogies that he was making. He was making analogies that said stuff like that. If a mom takes money away from one kid and gives it to another, yes, if you're directly harming someone, then that's different. Restorative justice in that sense makes sense. What it doesn't make sense to do is for the ancestors. So go back to the example that I gave. Like, we're talking about poor people. The harm that we're talking about right now is poverty and things like that. Poverty leading to crime. And we had lack of education opportunities in the past, which led to poverty generationally today. Why does it matter why you're poor now? Why does it matter why you're in a bad education system now? It doesn't matter why it occurred 50 years ago. Which matters is you're in that situation now. Should the government help? I have no problem with suggesting that we help people that are in these situations. What I have a problem with is the defense of systemic racism that you've seen Fanatic offer, which says, yes, as long as you're only giving money to black people and allowing poor white people to suffer, that's perfectly fine. As long as your intent is restorative justice. That's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. That's literally, it's hard to take people serious that want to talk about the harms of systemic racism when they're advocating for systemic racism to solve the potential systemic racism that they're talking about. But I'm sure he'll bring that methodology up here soon. Don't worry.
Thank you, Rob. Very cool.
Just real quick. Everybody's going off in like big tangents, so it's not like
they are not equivalent. I talk significantly more than I have this conversation. Literally, the diatribe he literally just went on this ridiculous soliloquy. Once again, he is constantly addressing the stream. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do a both sides thing here. He asked me for the methodology. I linked it. Then he went on for God knows how long, addressing things that I argue whatsoever. I did. It's already linked. It's at the bottom there, right there. Number one, so that's already there. So number two, I'm going to bring up something. I didn't just Google this study. I have to address all the nonsense that he said so far. I didn't just Google this study. This is a study that I've had for quite some time. I actually got this study from Rose Risk literally about a year ago. Rose Risk released a big old document. Right, he's an amazing person. He released a big old document with all of these studies. I've read through these. I argued with this with Joey Bao literally 6 months ago. This isn't something that I just Googled. We did go through the methodology during that conversation. I don't have it highlighted now. That was 6 months ago. I don't have it off the top of my head now. He asked me for the methodology. I linked it. They do control for various factors. They literally, so the idea that it's just not here, no. Asking someone, again, in a conversation to go into the very specifics of a specific study with the methodology prepared when they just literally were coming with the intention of talking about the broad conversation of systemic oppression is absolutely ridiculous, Robin. I think you know that. And you should probably start engaging with the people that you're debating with as opposed to making appeals to your stream the entire time. That's not conducive of a conversation.
Okay,
Can
I hop in, please?
Wait, hold on. All right. This is this is over. This is 2 minutes, everybody, for outros. I have like 3 questions from everybody, but holy crap. So yeah, 2 minutes for everybody. Cut, Steve, just go ahead, 2 minutes.
Muted, bud.
Start with B. No, start with. All right, fine.
Oh, there he is. There he is. All right, cut sleeves. Whenever you're ready. 2 minutes.
All right. Hello. It's cutscenes here. All right. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So this debate was fun, to say the least. Methodologies aside, even if we concede you everything in this debate, even if we say yes, your study is the perfect study ever, which it wasn't, and it's called Command F. You can just search up methodologies, like real simple like that. But even if we give up that, even if we give up like these harsh disparities, all you've proven is that systematic racism exists. What are the solutions to it? No one literally addressed it. This went conceded the whole debate. Solutions that Republicans propose always work better. Lower taxes, like quintupled the average income for Black households. The war on poverty, which is a leftist idea, destroyed fatherless homes. The crime bill, destroyed, passed by a Democrat. The social safety nets, destroyed Black families and made them more dependent on the government. So we see time and time again, leftist solutions is bigger government, which always makes the solution worse. And Republican solution is individuality, targeting the individual and family structure. Because everyone knows that a married couple is way better than being married to the government. Because family structure is important. Those are the people who are not supposed to leave you. Those are the people who are supposed to be providing income. The government's not always stable. We've learned this from 07 when they didn't give, like going to like some people's point, they didn't give the poor people the money first. That's why people who are disproportionately poor were disproportionately hurt by 07. Going to the government, going to the big corporations, going to the establishment for help never works. You have to go through your individuality, which when conceded the whole debate. No one ever addressed my points. No one ever addressed that like Republicans always have the better solution. So that's what I'm supposed to leave with the debate. Republicans have the better solution to these problems.
All right. Mr. Fanatic, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this conversation was pretty absurd, and I think everyone can pretty much see that. I think the idea is like when I provide an analogy and someone keeps on trying their best to avoid and skirt the analogy, it's because they know that like they were dead there. I feel like the conversation was pretty much done there. I've been having fun since then. Someone asked me for methodology. I presented the methodology. I think it's actually equally absurd for someone to sit here and say to you, you know, like we're talking about methodology. You can just control F the methodology. I linked you the study. Why don't you control F methodology? That's crazy. So ultimately, the thing is, this is one study. There are a bevy of studies that actually show exactly what systemic oppression is. Like I said, Rose Riss released an amazing document that has all of that. I go over some of that on my stream. I can go over all of these individual studies. I think the evidence is clearly there. I'm at least glad that at least we didn't have to start with him being unwilling to admit that systemic oppression exists. There's literally no doubt about it. It's very obvious to any person. Now, when you want to start getting into the specifics about what exactly you're going to do to treat a systemic oppression, to fix it, sometimes you're going to have to do racially codified things in order to offset some of the systemic damage that has been racially done to people. I think the fact that you would call that something restorative as something racist, that would be problematic. In the same way, looking at Rob's argument, because it seems like he really wants to argue the fact that men are oppressed, which I don't even disagree with. There are plenty of times where men are oppressed in specific systems. The idea is, if we were going to try to fix some of those systems, one, you would create laws to fix the issues that are happening to men, but then you would also need to do specific restorative measures that would target men. For women to see the restorative measures that are aimed at specifically fixing the injustices done to men as somehow misogynistic would be an error. When you're doing restorative things, it's not the exact same thing as doing the initial harm. The intent is entirely different, and restoration is going to inherently be discriminatory. But not all discrimination is bad. We discriminate all the time when we're determining who we find attractive versus whatever. It's not necessarily going to be it's not always going to be something that's like injurious. And I think in this case, the fact that he's equating the two is absolutely ridiculous.
Can't hear you after show.
Oh, and we'll give Shark the last word because he came in clutch today at the last minute. Rob, go ahead. 2 minutes.
Okay, so I made 2 points here that I wanted to make. The first is that oftentimes things that are considered systemic racism, we don't see evidence for. And second, actually cheering for systemic racism to solve past systemic racism is repugnant, and it's still cheering for racism. I don't care if you use the terms restorative; it's ridiculous. It's actual racism that we could see coming from the systems. The methodology thing is getting to the first point I said, where we often see people say, "Here's a data set that proves racism." So I was like, "Well, that doesn't prove racism." Fanatic says, "Well, I have a study that controls for everything you're talking about, and it still shows a discrepancy." I say, "Cool, let's see it." He provides the study, then does not provide the methodology. I looked all through the document, was unable to find it. He says, no, then I re-provided it. All he did was link to the same study a year prior. It doesn't have the methodology. He was unable to give it. But let's read from that study, the second one he linked. Quote, "Unlike in fiscal year 2010, white offenders, as opposed to black offenders, had the highest average sentence among offenders convicted of an offense carrying a mandatory minimum. Offenders relieved the application of mandatory minimum, and offenders subject to a mandatory minimum penalty at sentencing." Geez, it looks like in 2016, whites had all of those things on average worse than blacks when it came to mandatory minimums, according to his own study. And yet we're supposed to believe that there's somehow that systemic racism to the point that it justifies literally discriminating against people based on their skin color today. If you want to help poor people, that's fine. You help poor people. You do not judge people based on immutable characteristics such as their skin color, particularly saying that they're somehow recipients of benefits that occurred in the past. If someone's poor today, it doesn't matter how they got to that. It doesn't matter what their grandparents were doing. Our government should not be seeking to relegate these sins of the past with things today. It just makes the situation worse. It causes increased racial division. And as Cut Sleeves was saying, it ultimately makes things worse in these actual communities that they're trying to solve. Lastly, what I'll say is this. The game that Fanatic's playing is exactly the game that the elites want played. They want us divided on race so we don't look at the man behind the mirror or the man behind the curtain, which actually is seeking to divide us so they can continue to consolidate power and not do anything to help any of us in our country, regardless of skin color or gender.
All right. Shark, 2 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
To respond to Rob's point, since I never was able to get to it, I believe, once again, it was here. The only reason why it feels like here, when equality comes, it'll feel like oppression from the people who always got to benefit. At the end of the day, what happened is that the federal government allowed systemic oppression and even co-opted and pushed oppression of a certain group of people based on race, and they should be paid that back. It doesn't really matter if you recoup all of those funds by the time you get around to it. I'm sorry if you steal $10,000 from like my dad and then he dies and then they find you. I'm sorry, you're still getting sued. That's how that happens. That's how that works. Next of kin. This is how all of society works. Just for this, people like to bulk at it. It's really weird. You should look into that. In response to like what the Republicans do, I think it's really interesting that Cut Sleeve likes to flip flop between it's the Republicans, it's the liberals, then it's the left, then it's the Democrats, then it's the right. At the end of the day, I'm sorry, there are conservative Democrats and they don't have very good policy. Sorry, they're conservative too, and they're still bad, and they push bad policy. If you want to have that conversation, we can sometime. At the end of the day, I do think people should be paid back to the next of kin as soon as possible when a crime is committed against them or their family. This is how all of society has like always worked. It's just kind of weird that people like to bulk at this. I think we've laid out pretty well and put down the groundwork pretty well to lead to the conclusion that systemic racism is real. Rob even agreed to that. It does harm people. Rob does agree with that. And it's bad, and then we do need to fix it. I guess it's only solutions that we would disagree on there, and then maybe severity as well. But at the end of the day, I do believe that we were able to prove this pretty well with the time that we didn't get yelling at each other.
All right. Cool. So I just saved one question that I thought was good. And Fanatic, you don't have to if you don't want to. Nayar Lot Sensei asks, Aftershock, can you ask Fanatic to play like 30 seconds of his piano? Just like play us out. Can you do that for us? Or
I mean, normally I don't do this, but I'm gonna keep the party going. You know what I'm saying?
play us out.
I mean, you asked. What song y'all want to hear, though? That's a good question.
Whatever's on your heart.
Do like a
Let's go. I got some. I got you.
Oh, could you turn down your noise gate?
Yeah, we can't hear it.
I forgot. I know why. Because I have the noise suppression down. Let me fix that. 1 second. 1 second. And then my stream could hear it because I have direct audio there. But I got you. Let me see. Voice and video. Y'all. I mean, y'all don't have a song that you want to request?
I just
Uh,
I love the creative freedom. You're an artist.
Do
Alright.
you watch anime?
I do, but I don't know that I would know any of the songs. But I'll just play.
Right.
play like a riff. Like do like a cool riff.
Okay. I'm gonna make something on the spot.
It's amazing. That was absolutely phenomenal.
That
Thank
one was
you.
called "Fuck Rob Nord."
That's
I would buy that. I would buy that song, even if that's what it was called. That's amazing.
All right,
Honest to
well,
God,
hey,
that is
yeah.
incredible talent.
Yeah, that was.
I appreciate
At least we got off on a good note. You know, great talk, guys. It got catty, but what debate doesn't? Thanks for
Great
coming on,
podcast.
Shark. Again, thank you for coming in clutch, man. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, I'll see you guys later. We'll see you guys later.
All
Thanks for
right.
coming on.
Peace out.
Yo, I don't have a talent like I can
That was
speak
amazing.
really fast. I can speak really fast. That's about it.
Go ahead. Give me a taste. Speak really fast.
Oh, you want me to spread? Or,
Oh, the debate? Ew, that's they doing debates and like professional debates.
yeah. I can.
Just
I don't know if Rob Noah wants me to spread on his podcast.
no, he's gone
Oh.
already.
You're off already.
Oh,
Wait,
snap.
Cusleaf, I got a dip. But look, here, would you be willing to have a one-on-one conversation, a civil conversation on systemic oppression, like the broader topic,
For sure.
implementation and all that?
For sure.
Okay, I'm gonna send you a friend request. I think we probably need to have this conversation. I think it would be really beneficial. Okay.
Okay.
All right, friend request sent. We'll be in contact. We'll do it sometime during the week, whenever you have time or whatever. Okay.
And also, I hope I didn't step on your toes too much, Fanatic.
No, you didn't. I do think Rob was doing some debate tactics, and I feel like you were kind of falling for some of them. But I probably did the same exact thing. It's hard in the moment. I think 2v2 debates, because I'm probably like a microphone hog. I think that can be annoying for me, no matter what. It's not a you thing. It's just because I have a point I'm trying to make, so I'm going to be annoyed anytime it's subverted. That's not you personally. I think you did amazing. You did great. I would love to have more conversation with you in the future. I mean, that's just life. That's part of debates. Okay.
That's how it goes. Yeah. Take care of yourself.
Alrighty, man. I'm gonna send you a friend request too. We should probably keep in contact.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right. Peace.
Peace. All right, we did it. Damn, they were yelling at each other so damn much. Jeez. Okay, here, let me fix my camera really quick, and I'd like to. I need to be able to say thank you to everyone who followed and everything, who subscribed. You all were so nice at the beginning of that conversation. Oh my goodness, did we get a raid from Vosh? Is that what happened? I heard that we got a raid from Vosh as well. Oh my jeez. I wasn't even able to get to all of my points. My goodness. Hey, hey everyone. Hello.
Pog.
Hello. You're so pog. Thank you all for following, for joining the frenzy and being so incredibly pog. I appreciate you. Dylan. I'm here from Vosh and Dylan. Jeez, you guys are something else. I love you all so much.
Pog.
You're so, way too kind to me tonight. Vosh bad. Truest shit I heard all week. Vosh in the Serfs and Dylan Burns. Oh my gosh, everyone's coming down to say hey. Thank you. Leah, no! Leah, you can't do this. You can't give me another 30. No way. It doesn't work like that. Where do you... Oil Baron Leah. Thank you so I can't thank you enough for that. Unlucky Magi Mages, thank you so much for that. Oh, Dylan with the raid as well. Thank you so much, Dylan. Thank you. Bert Hold for the $1. Completely rolled him. Thank you. Yes, we did. Boy Meets Mini for the gifted subs, and also Mickelside for the gifted subs as well. Thank you so much. You all mean so much to me. It's been an incredible night. Gizmorgon for the gifted bits, and thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. All right, how do we do? We did great. Thank you. How did we do? There were a couple of points that I wanted to be able to get to. I'm really sad that he cut it out. Got to sleep after this. Yeah, take care. Make sure you take care of yourself. Drink some water, okay? Hype train got right. Hype train got absolutely bodied. It got bodied. My geez. You did wonderfully. Thank you. I was really hoping. I feel like Fnatic thought I was falling for like one debate tactic. Sorry, a little loud. I had a plan going in there. I saw that Fnatic and Nor were like really grinding against this one point, and I really wanted to pull back to the reason why these families deserve reparations, and also I really wanted to talk about how it's not just that they're not being punished. For one, they just don't get the benefits of previously being oppressed. That's just not how that works. Listen, if a poor family gets like their house broken into by the police and they kill like a family member, their neighbors don't get that money from the settlement or whatever that happens because they weren't directly harmed. That's not how that works. I'm sorry, like if someone dies as the result of a crime that was committed or injustice committed against them, the next of kin gets that money. Very often this always happens. I just feel like it's really interesting people start to balk at this point when it comes to race, and I'm not even like straight up for like cash. I'm not even like completely in the the ball pit for cash reparations or anything. Do you usually do debates? What kind of content do you create? Well, Vosh took my style of content where we plan segments and talk about them on stream. Also, we play games. So that's usually around what we do on here. That's usually what we do.